right, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome back to another episode of IT Pro TV. I'm Don Pizzette, today with Mr. Ronnie Wong. How's it going, Ronnie?
It is going well today. I am very pleased to announce that I read that Miley Cyrus did not twerk one time at the VMA Awards.
Really?
Yes.
So, this shows how much I follow the news. When were the VMA Awards?
Yesterday, I think, or the day before. I don't know. Yeah.
Timely information. All right, well, we are diving right back into the world of PMP,
That's
Project
right.
Management Professional today. And, for those of you watching live, we took a little bit of a hiatus between the first half of the show and this one. But for those of you watching recorded, no, we're just another click on the
That's
webpage.
right.
So what we're doing today is we are cracking open an all-new process group, right? We are diving into the wonderful world of the executing process group.
Yep.
So we recorded more than half the show at this
Yep.
point, and over half the show fell in these first two process groups, right? Initiating and planning. Planning being the one where a lot of our work is. I mean, look at all those processes in there. Today we're going to dive into executing. And aside from closing, executing is really one of the shorter ones. You wouldn't think it is, because in a project, executing is where we spend most of our time. What is executing? It's
Managing.
doing
Yep.
the work that we plan for, right? We planned all sorts of work to be done. Now we need to do it, all right? And then, what you said, Ronnie, is if somebody's doing it, somebody's got to manage it, right? So this is where our kind of our needs start to diverge, right? We start splitting apart what's happening here. And you'll find that executing for us as a project manager is actually kind of boring, right? But not truly. We don't have a lot to do with executing. We're monitoring. So while other people are doing the actual work of the project, we need to be managing and monitoring, making sure things are going the way they're supposed to. Well, we're not ready for monitoring just yet. We're going to dive into executing. So we're going to look at one side of things, and it may seem that we're moving kind of quickly through the material, that we don't have a lot of data here. But the reason is, as a project manager, there's not a lot you do in executing, right? And I've shown this diagram multiple times during this show, this one, where sure, we have initiation, then planning, then execution, then monitoring, controlling, then closing. But if you were to actually diagram it out, it's more like this right here, where execution and monitoring and controlling happen at the same time. All right, and if we were to go back to our process diagram, if you were to combine these two processes together, you'll see that it actually would be quite a bit of stuff, and it would even compete with planning. All right, so all that being said, let's dive into this stuff, right? So we're going to take a look at direct and manage project work. That's going to be our first process group to tackle, and you'll see that there's not a whole heck of a lot to this one. In fact, I don't think there's a single thing on this slide that is new from what we've talked about previously. When we go into execution, we basically tell people, okay guys, you know that schedule we made? Do it, right? Look at the days, figure out what you're supposed to be doing, get to work. We need that budget we created, get to cutting those checks or whatever, do the thing that we plan on you doing, all right? So when it comes to directing and managing that, we're really just making sure that it happens, right? So most of our tools and techniques here are really just going to center around information gathering. How do we find out about the work people are doing? Well, the people who are doing the work, they're looking at our project management plan. They're looking at that plan that we came up with that's telling them what to do. If there have been change requests that have been approved, those become part of the plan too, right? So that's where they're finding out what to do, all right? When a company starts actually doing work, there's enterprise environmental factors and organizational process assets. We've seen those on every process so far. But basically, your company has a way of doing work, and that's it. That's the way of doing it. They have certain forms they fill out, time cards, punch clocks, whatever, all that stuff that's involved in actually doing the work, all right? For us as a project manager, though, all we're doing is gathering data. And we gather data through a few different systems. The first one is expert judgment, right? Use your noodle, or your eyes in this case. Just look, see what's going on. Keep tabs on people and make sure they're doing their work. Meetings are another way, right? We do these here at IT Pro TV. Every morning we have a stand-up meeting. We get everybody together and we exchange information about what we've been working on and what we're going to be working on so that everybody knows where everything is. Those meetings are pivotal, and boy, you hear more and more about these all the time with other methodologies like Agile and Scrum and all that, where they're really pushing gathering data through meetings, right? But meetings are a slippery slope, right? I'm not a big fan of meetings that are unstructured. So you need to have structured meetings to really be successful. You want to make sure that you don't bring in a bunch of people to a meeting and then sit there and get nothing out of it, right? I think I talked about them in another episode, so I don't want to dive too deep into it, but I have a few rules with meetings, which are, rule number 1, invite as few people as possible. Smaller meetings are always more effective. Rule number 2, every person who comes to the meeting, at the end of the meeting, they should have an action item. They should have something they need to do. If they don't come out of the meeting with an action item, they didn't need to be in the meeting, right? You could have just gotten their data from ahead of time. So those are some of the rules that I have. And then number 3 is always have an agenda, right? Don't just go into a meeting willy-nilly with no actual plan. Have something ready. Have a list of topics you want to talk about, and make sure you distribute it before the meeting so people can prepare. They might need to bring data with them. You don't want to have a second meeting because the first meeting didn't have all the information.
Right.
All right. But the one I skipped over is probably the most useful, and that's the Project Management Information System, the PMIS, and that is a pivotal tool that I know we've talked about.
Yeah. Now, in this process, right, for us as project managers, this is where we actually have to keep track of that triangle, right? That the constraint triangle that we actually have here of the project cost, the time, and the overall scope here. And the easiest and most effective way for us to be able to do that is to use that project management instrument that we have, because without it, right, the project continues to grow. It continues to now that it's actually executing, right, all of a sudden it just grows beyond our control. But being able to keep track of it all in one place is very essential for us. And for us to keep everything underneath that particular constraint triangle is going to be how we successfully complete our overall project. So we want to make sure that we have a hold, or at least we understand whatever tool we're going to be using.
Yeah, and what tool do you use?
Yeah.
It's up to you, right? There's a ton of them out there. You can pick and choose. Let me just give you an example. Maybe you use Microsoft Project to do your project management. Well, as people are out there doing the work, as they're executing, they're filling out time cards. Yeah. They're saying, hey, I work from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday, or hey, I did some overtime this day, or whatever. They're submitting those time cards to you, and then you punch them in to Microsoft Project, right? Or maybe you've got Microsoft Project Server. This is nice, because then there's a web page. And instead of people filling out their own time card, they go to the web page and they put their time in there, and it's already entered in the system. They do it for you. Then all you have to do is review it. That's kind of nice. Maybe you use some other system. It's completely up to you. Everybody uses different solutions, it seems, and you just find the one that's right. Just remember, with a PMIS, the thing to remember on the exam especially is a PMIS is only as good as the data you put into it. All right. If you haven't put data into it yet, it's not going to be very effective. So, for example, you might be looking at your PMIS and it tells you your project is on schedule and under budget. Things look great. But meanwhile, sitting right there on your desk, you've got 10 overtime sheets that you've got to enter in. And all of a sudden, you're going to find that your schedule is good, but your budget is shot. You've gone way over budget on overtime fees. But your PMIS doesn't know that because you haven't given it the data yet. All right. So that's why when it comes to the PMP exam, they don't really focus on a PMIS very much. They ask questions about it, but they don't show you one. They don't say, do this in Microsoft Project or Timberline or whatever program it is you use. Primavera, I guess that would be bigger. So they don't do that, and that's because everybody uses different stuff. And an effective project manager is doing both, using the PMIS and using their own expert judgment, that number one tool and technique right there. All right. Now, as we monitor the work getting done, we generate some outputs. Now, obviously, if work is being done, then there's not much of an output coming from us. There's output coming from the people in the form of deliverables, right? They finish their job and they create whatever it is they were supposed to create, or they perform whatever activity it was they were supposed to perform, all right? If we're building a house and we have some drywallers coming in to put the walls up, then when they're done with the work, I should be able to walk in the house and see drywall everywhere, right? Not see struts and beams and all that stuff. But if they're not done yet, then at a minimum, they should be delivering work performance data, right? How much work they got done, how many hours they put in, how much we need to pay them, right? Timesheets and progress reports. Those are big things that come out of the outputs. Right? On a good day.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's a bad day. Sometimes things don't go quite right. Sometimes things don't match up with our plan that we defined earlier. And when that happens, we end up with change requests, right? So if something's not working out according to plan, we need to do a change request and we need to get it approved. If it's approved, great. If it's not approved, well, now we've got to find some other way to correct for this divergence with our plan. All right, and the same thing goes for these last couple of ones. Project management plan updates and project document updates. The most common one that I update at this point are the risk management plans, right? Because we have a risk register where we're keeping track of all of that, and that's designed to be a living document where you're updating your odds of effect and things of those nature. So you're constantly updating that information as you move through. That's all a part of direct and managed project work. All right, so as far as processes go, this one's pretty straightforward, and in fact, you could boil it down to, what, 2 sentences, right? Yeah. Tell people to work and make sure they do it. Yeah. That's really what this process is all about.
Yeah. At this point in our lives, right, especially as project managers, we should no longer feel, I shouldn't say that, we should no longer need to feel the idea of actually jumping right in and having to do everything by ourselves. Again, when you're actually going for your PMP, I delegate it out. I just need to make sure that what I delegate out is actually done at this point, and that's why using those tools are actually very helpful for us. So directing and managing for us, again, is the idea of just monitoring, making sure it's done.
All right, so what else do we have? People are doing their work,
yep.
Right? Now some other things need to happen. You might remember in the planning phase, we went through quality assurance, or quality management in general, right? Now, remember, quality management is made up of 2 pieces, quality assurance and quality control, right? Quality assurance is stopping problems before they happen, right? Making sure that our systems are optimized and functioning properly to stop or prevent a problem from happening in the first place. Quality control is detecting and correcting the problem after it occurs, right? When we did quality management, so planned quality management, we did both, right? We kind of planned for both. Well, now in executing, you're executing your quality assurance, and in monitoring and controlling, we'll do quality control, all right? So they're kind of broken in pieces here, and the reason is the project manager is typically over here doing quality control, right? But the work package owners, the people who are actually doing the work, they're the ones who do the quality assurance, okay? Maybe my project has roofing that needs to be done, right? So we got to put shingles across the roof. And one of the risks that I had to quality was that somebody could fall off the roof and break a leg and have to go to the hospital, and now I'd be short 1 person, which would put me behind schedule, okay? So as part of my quality assurance, I might have said, you know what, we're gonna plan for this. We're gonna make sure that all the workers who are up there on the roof have harnesses, so that if they fall, they'll be safe, they've got a harness. That's gonna ensure that I have all my people, that the roof gets done on time, and that we move forward, all right? So who's gonna make sure that those people are wearing harnesses? Well, that's their job. That's what they're supposed to do. As part of roofing, they need to harness up and get up there. So they're doing quality assurance. They're putting on that harness and getting up there to make sure they don't get hurt so they can do their work, right? That's one example, right? Other examples of quality assurance are just measuring the performance or making sure that the work is actually getting done. If they tell me it's going to take 4 days to get the roofing done, at the end of day 1, I expect the work to be about 25% done. And at the end of day 2, they should be halfway. And if I go and look and they're not even there, then there's a problem, right? I think in an earlier show, I made an example of if you're like a blue jean factory, right? And you're manufacturing 1,000 pairs of blue jeans at a time and you want to get your defect rate down, how can we prevent problems ahead of time? One of the examples I gave was doing routine maintenance on the equipment, right? The equipment's not broken, but we do maintenance on it anyway to prevent a problem from happening. So perform quality assurance means doing that maintenance, right? Getting the worker, the support tech or whatever to come out and lubricate or replace parts or whatever it is that they do on that machine to prevent problems in the first place, all right? As a project manager, we just need to make sure that's getting done, right? We're not the ones who do it, other people are. But we do have a whole process group for this, so let me pull it up. And we'll go perform quality assurance. Now our inputs on this are a lot of the things that I was talking about a moment ago. Our quality management plan. We planned for how we want to do this, so that's obviously going to be an input, if I can say it. Process improvement plan, right? There are many organizations that do continual process improvement. Just because things are running smooth now doesn't mean we can't find new ways to make it run more smoothly. So if we have a plan for that, then that's an input also. After that, we've got our quality metrics. I mentioned something like, how long I think it's going to take that roof to get done. If they tell me 4 days and they do it, in order, so at the end of day 2 they should be 50% done, that's my metric. How do I measure that? Maybe I measure it by square footage of the roof.
Right.
So if it's 2,000 square foot of roof, they should be 1,000 square foot done when they're halfway through their time, right? So I can use that as my quality metric, and we define those in our plan. Now we're just going out and measuring them, right? Making sure that we're staying on schedule and moving along, right? Quality control is also a part of this. Now, I know this is quality assurance. Quality control is detecting a problem after it happened, but we still feed data in from that too. And then any other project documents that we have, because there's a lot of data spread throughout them. The most important one being really our scope, because we're trying to make sure that we maintain our scope.
All right.
All right. After that, we've got quality management and control tools. And the quality management and control tools can be a number of different things that are out there. And we're going to see some of these later on. Why is that little text box going to stay up? There we go. So there's a number of different tools that are out there, but there's simple things, usually like checklists, right? So when somebody's going to get up there and do that roof work, they should have a checklist that says, all right, did I get enough tile to take up with me? Do I have enough visqueen to lay down? Do I have my harness on, right? These are all the little things that we need to check off before we hop on up on that roof and start to get to work.
Yeah. A lot of times we simply do the idea of also like a flow process, right? Where you actually go, okay, did I complete this step? Did I do the next step here? To make sure that everything goes through the entire process and we don't skip steps. One of the hardest things about the idea of quality assurance is that sometimes you'll skip steps when you don't really mean to. And so by having some type of response, right, being able to actually go, okay, I know what's going to be our quality metric at this point, those are some of the tools that you may also implement instead.
Yep. All right, other things like quality audits. We're going to talk more about quality audits under quality control, but a quality audit is usually, it takes many forms, but most commonly, it's when a project manager or somebody delegated by the project manager visits the site where the work is being done and performs an audit to see where we're at, right? This is one of our main information gathering techniques. We trust our employees, and our employees are giving us progress reports, right? So that's good. We want that, right? But it's never a bad idea to go and reaffirm that same knowledge, right? Go and do your own visual inspection to see that things are actually progressing the way that they should be progressing, and that they are where they're being reported. I remember this story, which was, I was living in Seattle at the time, and there was a guy in Seattle who had the opportunity to buy a house in Detroit, Michigan. And if you're not in the U.S., Detroit, Michigan is a very big city that is basically collapsing.
Yeah.
It's gone bankrupt. It's in really bad shape. So this guy had a chance to buy a house for $5,000, which is a ridiculously small amount of money. And so he buys this house. Now, he never actually went there. So people were sending him pictures of the house, and he looked at it, and he bought it sight unseen, and he hired a contractor out there in Detroit to go and remodel it to get it livable again, because it wasn't livable. And the contractor said, yeah, give me 6 months, and I think it was like $100,000, something like that, and he would fix the place up and turn it around to where he could sell it. Well, there were two problems. The first problem was the guy didn't know the neighborhood, and the majority of the neighborhood had been, what do they call them? Condemned, that's it. Yeah, it had been condemned. So the majority of the neighborhood wasn't livable. Even if you made this one house livable, nobody would want to live there because it's surrounded by condemned stuff. The other thing was, the contractor was sending him pictures of the work to show the progress that was being done, and the pictures were of other houses. And he wasn't actually doing the work. He had basically stolen the guy's money. So for months, he kept getting these picture status reports, and they were all fake. And it wasn't until he actually went out to Detroit to look at this place that he realized that not a single bit of work had been done. And by that point, the city stepped in and demolished the building. So he basically lost everything he put into it. That's the kind of thing that happens. Now, that's a worst case scenario, right? Worst case scenario. But it is possible, especially with contractors, that you may not be getting the performance out of them that they're reporting. And what you don't want is for them to be pushing off work and then all of a sudden slam you with a bunch of overtime at the end while they're trying to correct and get back on schedule. You need to catch that ahead of time, which is why this falls under quality assurance, not quality control.
Yeah, and so a lot of times what ends up happening, right, when you start seeing quality deteriorate, okay, and then that's what catches your attention. By that point, it's too late. They've already produced 10,000 things instead of 100 things. So the idea of actually making sure that we go out and do the quality audits, right, gives us the ability to go, okay, here's the good stuff that's going on, but here's what we need to do to improve on that or to continue to maintain the quality that we need. And we need to do that regularly because once again, if you go, okay, I don't have to worry about you again, and then 10,000 more things get produced and we're now not satisfied with the quality, well, we've let it go on for too long. So for us as a project manager, doing these quality audits are very much an important part of whatever process we go through, or we're going to find ourselves where cost overruns now and then time behind because we have to go back and reproduce everything that we thought now was bad.
Yep. Now, the tools that we actually use for this, it's up to us, and we came up with them back in the planning phase. But just to recap, if it's been a while since you watched that episode, let me bring up, these are Ronnie's notes here. So these are all some of the different tools we talked about in previous episodes that we use here. So affinity diagrams, right? Those were where we try and look at problems and tie them to a cause, right? Which cause is the most, or is the cause of most failures of quality, and how we can correct that. Process decision program charts. That's what you were talking about, Roddy. Basically, like a flow chart to understand what's going on. Our interrelationship digraphs, and our tree diagrams. All of these are just different ways of mapping together problems and causes and trying to prevent them ahead of time. So these were all tackled under planning. Now we're just using them. So in planning, we talked about like what those charts were and how they work. Now we're actually getting the data back. Now we're starting to get that information because we start manufacturing those blue jeans, and now we're churning out thousands of blue jeans per day. We might start to identify fault numbers that are different than what we originally planned. And there might be sources of those faults that are different. We might have planned for the button machine not working right, or the stitching machine not working right. And then at the end of the day, it turns out that it's the washing machine where we actually launder them before selling that's causing some problems, and we just didn't foresee it. And so we identify that, through a interrelationship diagram or however it is we choose to find that. We populate that data, and now we start to take actions. So this is one of those processes that when we get through it, oftentimes we go right back to it. We're cycling through this for the entire execution phase. So when we do this analysis, we then have to figure out what to do about it. And what to do about it is oftentimes going to be a change request. So we change the way that we do something to correct for it, and then we go right back in as an input, and we run through the same process again. So change requests are the number one thing that's going to come out of this. All right. But there's other things, our plan updates, our other project document updates as we gather this information together, right? I mentioned all those tools that came up in the planning phase. They're a part of our quality management plan. Now we're filling them with that data. And that'll be important because whether your project is successful or whether it fails doesn't matter. At the end of the I guess it does matter, right? But at the end of the project, either outcome, you're going to do a lessons learned. And if your project succeeded, it might be because things went a lot better than you planned, right? Or if it failed, it might be that things went a lot worse than how you planned. And it's generally the data we get from performing quality assurance that tells us which it was. And we can see like, man, our fault rate, our defect rate was way lower than what we anticipated. And so as a result, we were able to produce higher yields, and we were able to finish early and finish under budget. Or you might find that, man, there were some defects that we just didn't plan for, we didn't know about, and they caught us by surprise, and it gave us lower yields, it took us longer to get done, and we came in over budget. But here's why, we didn't see this, right? Well, if you spot it during the execution phase, you can do change requests to correct your schedule and your budget to reflect these new outcomes, and that way you don't come in over budget or behind schedule. And remember, when you come in under budget and ahead of schedule, that sounds like a great thing, right? But what it actually is a reflection of bad planning, right? It means that in your planning early on, there was something you didn't take account for, right? Either the amount of work people could do, the price you could get things for, there was work you thought you had to do that you didn't. That's what it means when you come in under budget and ahead of schedule. A lot of people look at that as a great thing, but it's almost always a reflection of bad planning. And I shouldn't say it that way. I shouldn't say bad planning. It's just incomplete planning, right? We didn't see all the possible outcomes.
Yeah. And this is where that constraint triangle comes back in, right? We've always talked about that idea that if we overemphasize one over the other, we sacrifice the other two. So we emphasize the idea of trying to come in under time. Well, we might sacrifice something in our scope or in the overall, time. I was trying to make sure I said it right, to make sure, right? So if I only emphasize that, I might actually see I did come in under time, but why? And so you always want to make sure that you keep that in hand. And quality assurance is probably one of the best ways that we keep right on top of the project, is by making sure we're active in that part of the process as well.
All right, Ronnie, well, that is probably a pretty good spot for us to stop and take a break.
Sounds good.
We've talked about directing and managing project work. We've talked about performing quality assurance. Now we need to continue on. We're going to talk about some other
there we
neat
go.
things that we need to deal with, which all fall under human resources. You'll see we've got acquire project team, develop project team, and manage project team. So team building for the rest of the episode. We're a team, right? There's no I in team. So, so definitely stay tuned for that. These are some process groups that get overlooked a lot, and I think they are important, especially since they're on the exam.
Right.
So stay tuned. We'll be back after this. All right, welcome back, everybody. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to take a look at the human resources area of our, or knowledge area of our project, right? And this is kind of a funny one because we're still in the executing process group, but if you look at some of the processes we need to tackle next, it's things like acquire a project team, develop a project team, manage a project team, right? It's all centered around the project team. Now, before we dive too deep into that, let's remember what the project team is, right? Who is on your team? This does not mean every person who's doing work for your project, right? Not all of your work package owners. A work package owner, that's a person who's either responsible for or actually performing the work as defined in our work breakdown structure. But the project team, these are going to be people like yourself, the project manager, and any accountants, project management assistants, sub-project managers, any kind of record keepers and other people who are actually associated with running the project itself, all right? You guys have to work together, and there's various steps we have to go through to make that happen. Now, it's kind of funny because this one falls under executing, but a lot of your project management team members are involved in the earlier phases of the project. So if I jump back to this, you know, how are we going to do our plan if we don't have all of our team members? Well, there's some team members you need while you're in planning, and there's some you don't, right? I might know that, man, I really need an accountant. I need a CPA. I need somebody who can, you know, keep track of my books and make sure that I'm reporting on the up and up and that I'm following GAAP and all that other stuff. You know, I need that accountant, right? But I'm not spending any money yet, so I don't need the accountant today, all right? I don't actually need the accountant until we start spending money, and we don't actually start spending money until execution starts, okay? So that accountant is going to be on my project management team, but I don't need them just yet. So in the planning phase, we're normally dealing with a skeleton crew, right? Just the bare minimum people we need to actually plan for this project and get work done. Once we switch into executing, we'll need all of our additional support staff. If this is a massive project, if you're building a shopping mall, right? A shopping mall is huge, and you as a project manager cannot go and inspect and audit all the different construction going on at once because there's too much. So you might have assistants, several other people that are going out and doing those inspections. Again, you don't need them in planning, right? One person can handle the planning, fine, but then we need extra assistance when we actually get into executing. So we planned for that in our planning phase, right? We figured out who all we needed on that team. Now we need to get them, okay? So we're bringing in the people to fill that gap, and that's what this phase is all about. So you'll notice that 9.2 is acquire project team. So let's look at that one. If we go to acquire project team, basically we go back to our plan, our human resources management plan right here, and our way our company does business, right? Enterprise environmental factors and organizational process assets. We take that information that we got, and now we go and we get our team. All right, now how we get our team is going to vary from company to company. So you'll see there's a number of different ways to do it. All right, one way is pre-assignment. For somebody like the project manager, the project manager has been pre-assigned. Back in the planning phase, really back in initiation, when initiation was done, when your company said, yes, we're going to roll forward with that, they probably pre-assigned a project manager, all right? So you've been assigned to work it, you're already on the team, right? That's not always true, right? You might have a very large organization that says, you know what, we want to go forward with this project, let's initiate it, let's kick it off, and it's a key stakeholder, right, or a sponsor that's really pushing it forward at that point, and a project manager hasn't been assigned yet, right? And it might be that planning is already completed and now we bring in the project manager, all right? You see that with construction fairly frequently, where the house has already been designed. If they've already built it 50 times before, they know how long it's going to take, how much it's going to cost. All the planning is already done. We don't need a project manager in the planning phase because all that work is already done to build this house. It's cookie cutter, right? But somebody does need to run the operation to make sure the house is built. So by the time we move to executing, we bring in the PM then, after planning. So planning, you know, the project manager is not involved in at all. Now they just have to follow the plan, Other reasons we might do pre-assignment, you might have somebody who's an expert. Your company might be deploying some software where you have one employee who's the expert and nobody else is that knowledgeable. So it's a given that you're going to need that person to complete this project, right? Or you might not have anybody who can do that job, and in which case you're going to have to contract out or you're going to have to train somebody. So again, pre-selection may be important. Another one is negotiation, right? And this is one that I've fallen into a lot, which is you might be kicking off a project and you go to acquire your team. So you go to your PMO and the PMO says, oh, you need a web developer? Here, I'll give you Steve. And you look at it and you're like, ooh, Steve, I've never heard of Steve before. And so you start asking those questions like, hey, how long Steve been with the company? Oh, 2 months, that's great. And he just graduated from college, wonderful. And in the back of your mind, you're thinking, man, there's Amy down in the web development department. I've worked with her. She is a pro. She's been doing it 10 years. She's awesome. I really wish I could have gotten her, but I got Steve, right? So you go back to the PMO and you say, boy, is there any way that I could get Amy on my project instead of Steve? And they say, well, Amy's already working on this other project. And now you start negotiating. Now you start saying, well, all right, what if I trade you this person for that person? What if I move some stuff around on my schedule and you try and work it to build it around that person on the team? It may sound crazy, right? Like, why would you go through that much work? But I'll tell you, in real life, having the right person for the job is oftentimes the difference between success and failure. And the relationships you build when you work on projects, you'll want those same team members over and over again if you've had successes, because you already have that, I'm going to use the word, Ronnie, synergy. You've already got that synergy, right? Which means absolutely nothing. But you've already got that connection, that relationship with that person. It works out better. It makes things easier, so we want that. Not that we can't get by without it, right? If we have to deal with all new team members, we can get by, or a good project manager can, but it's so much safer to have somebody you know. So negotiation is not an uncommon thing.
Yeah, it almost sounds like fantasy football.
It's exactly like fantasy football, except, I got 2 web developers and I got to change my lineup tonight.
Right.
So, all right. Somebody probably makes a video game out of that.
Yeah.
All right, acquisition. Acquisition is actually getting these people, right? Now, as a project manager, you might not have hire and fire responsibilities inside your company. Oftentimes you don't, right? You may not even have direct authority over these people. So they probably already have a functional manager that they work for, and now you're coming in as a project manager, so split differences, right? So you've actually got to acquire that employee, either going to their functional manager to have them assigned, or going to human resources or your PMO, whoever it is that actually assigns them. This is where we go back to our enterprise environmental factors and organizational process assets, right? We go through whatever mechanisms our company has to get them assigned to the project, and then we do our onboarding, right? Onboarding is where you bring the person up to speed. This might be the very first time they've heard of this project. They may not have even known it existed prior to you talking to them. And you say, all right, here's the project, here's what we're gonna do, here's how much time we need, here's what we need from you. You gotta bring all that information to the table so they understand it. Now, a new one that we see that is, it's kind of a hot button with PMI, so it's something you're definitely going to see on the exam, is what's called a virtual team, right? More and more commonly today, we don't have our team all in one location. Oftentimes, we'll have employees that are spread across the country, across the globe, right? You have different time zones, different countries involved, all sorts of complexities there. That's called a virtual team, all right? And virtual teams are fine. They do require a different management style, though, because there's a lot of unknowns, right? Ronnie, you and I, we work in the same office.
We do.
Right? When I walk into the office in the morning, I know I saw Ronnie's car outside, so I know he's here. And his cube, we have cubes here. We're a cube-type place. And Ronnie's cube is positioned in the deepest, darkest corner of the office, and I'm actually kind of pointing at it. And I can't see over there, so I don't really know if Ronnie's there. But I saw his car when I pulled in, so I know he's here, right? I know he's here and he's working, and right now you're standing there, so I know you're working, right? But if this were a virtual team,
you wouldn't know.
If you were at home, working from a home office or something like that, I wouldn't know. And so there's a certain level of trust you have to have. I trust that he's at home working, right? Maybe he isn't, right? So virtual teams create complexities there that we've got to plan around. Some people like it, some people don't.
Right.
I'm not a big fan of it, and I've done it. I've done it where actually I lived in Seattle for a while, and I moved back to Gainesville, Florida, and I was still working for a Seattle company for like 6 more months because I was, wrapping up some projects I was working on. So I was doing project management from Gainesville, Florida, managing entire teams that were in Seattle. I was doing a disaster recovery rollout to a disaster recovery center that I had never even been to, and that kind of stuff. That's what happens with virtual teams, and it does work. Now, you hear a lot of times where employers don't like it and employees love it. Employees, yeah, I want to work from home. Well, I can say as an employee, I did not like it. My home is not conducive to getting work done. So, you got your kids making noise and a damned cat jumping on the keyboard and stuff like that. So, dogs barking, it's craziness. So, well, now it sounds like my house is a zoo. It's not that bad, but it's not as good as when I get to work and I've got my monitors, I've got my little cube and my phone, and I'm able to focus in and get stuff done. I get more done at work. I'd rather be at the office than at home. Different people, benefit different ways from that. So just be aware, virtual teams, the realistic option, more people are using it. There's also some high visibility stuff like HP, Hewlett Packard, they were pushing really big for this for years, and then last year they announced they were canceling all work from home stuff. So employees could either come back to the office or they could get another job. They canceled all that. All right, and then the last tool that we have here is what's called multi-criteria decision analysis. All right. If you have employees that you want to work with, you know who they are, you pick them and you're done, you don't worry about this. But if you're dealing with an entirely new set of employees, people that you've never met before, right? How do you pick who's going to be right for your project? And one of the ways to do that is multi-criteria decision analysis. And Ronnie, I think you did this in your notes. Where did I put your notes? Let me find in here. There are a lot of criteria we can look at. Here we go. So what are some of the things we need to consider when we pick a person, right? Availability is probably the most important one, because if they're not available, you can't use them, you don't care about the rest of it, right? So we need to make sure that they're available. After that, though, is where we really start to break into other things. Cost, right? You may have some people who are cheaper to work with than others, right? This might be hourly wages or salary. These might be contractors and different contract types. So some of them will be less of a financial burden. Now, normally, the less you pay, the lower quality work you get, but that's not always true, right? So it is a factor we need to pay attention to. Experience is one that I always care about, right? If you have somebody who has experience doing a job, they're going to give you good estimates and they're going to get the work done because they know what needs to be done. If you've got somebody who's inexperienced, who's new, right? That kid right out of college, it's not that they don't know what they're doing, it's just they've never done it before. So they can't give very accurate estimates and the odds of mistakes happening are higher, right? So somebody's experience we definitely want to measure. All right, ability is next. Some people have it, some people don't, right? This is not something we can really learn. I have this, I'm going to show it here on the show. I have this picture on my wall.
Motivator.
Yes, called incompetence. And I've had this hanging in my office for years. And I just have a cube now, so I don't have it hanging. But in my project management days, I did. And I love this picture. It is somewhat negative. But basically it says, when you earnestly believe you can compensate for a lack of skill by doubling your efforts, there's no end to what you can't do. and that happens. Yes. If somebody doesn't have the ability to do a job, it doesn't matter if they're a hard worker, if they're cheap, if they're smart, it doesn't matter. They don't have the ability. They can't do it. And so there's just not going to be a way to leverage them. But even if they do have the ability, there's obviously different levels of ability. So you will have some people, like when it comes to web design, well, let's use IT Pro TV as an example. All right, we have Rob. Rob is our web design and web developer guru. He really knows his stuff. And if there's a problem with the IT Pro TV website, if somebody gives him that problem, he can have it fixed usually in minutes. I mean, he is a sharp guy. I happen to know a good bit of that stuff too, because I took a lot of courses in college, and so I can do some basic PHP and some web development. But for me to do the same thing that Rob does, I easily take 4 times the amount of time, right? So if it's a 1-hour activity, it might take me 4 hours to get it done. I can get it done. I've got the ability, but I don't have the same level of ability as Rob. So getting the right person for the job is important. That's ability.
Yeah, and that right person for the job not only comes down to whatever you're doing, but it may be where the person's excellent at what they do, but they can't really work in that project environment in terms of a time constraint that they might have. And when you have that where you go, man, this guy's great. He can do everything we need him to do. He just can't do it in the time that we need him to do it. you got to be realistic about that as well, because that can clearly drive you nuts just as much, because you know he has the ability, you just know he can't manage his time very well, and that's just something that would, that just goes overboard.
Now the next entry is knowledge, and that might sound like it's duplicating ability, but there is a difference, okay? Ability is not normally something that we can gain, but knowledge is. I might not know how to do whatever this activity is that's being assigned to me, but I can learn it. Maybe you'll have to send me to some training, right? So maybe we'll take Rob. So Rob, he knows PHP, but maybe I need some stuff done in Python or some other language. Well, he doesn't know that language, but you know what? He knows development. He knows a programming language, so all he needs to do is run through a quick course or whatever to learn the other language, and then he can get into it, right? So he's got that base knowledge. That is an important thing. Some people, if we bring them onto our project team, we might need to train them. If they've never worked in a PMI project management environment before, we might need to train them, send them through, like the, not PMP, but like CAPM or something like that, so they get some basic project management training. That's something we can always add on to people. All right. Skills. They might have skills beyond what you need, and that means they could be helpful in other areas of the project. So you might be able to use them for more than one role if they've got the skills to do it. And then attitude, right? Attitude, it's important, right? If somebody is not a good fit for your team, if they don't mesh, if they don't have that synergy, right? Then they can actually bring the project down. And so making sure you got people with the right attitude for the project. And then international factors. This is starting to become a big one. I used to laugh about this one because we didn't really care. But nowadays, like here in the US, we've got a limit on the amount of H-1B visas that can be issued. So if you're using employees that are located outside of the United States, you have limits to how you can use them, how much time you can use them, and so on. Other countries have their own requirements. If you're operating inside of Europe, you have things like the VAT, the value-added tax, and stuff that starts to apply to some of those activities. So all of those are things that are things that you've got to be concerned about when you're measuring these people. So what you can do is you can actually create a matrix, and you can start to create report cards or ranking the various possible people based on these categories. You determine which one's more important, which one's less important, and you rank to be able to select the best person for the job. Odds are your PMO is already doing that, but if you don't have a PMO, then you have to. All right, now the outputs on this one are pretty straightforward. When we figure out who our team is going to be, we get them, right? So project staff assignments. You get the staff and you give them their assignment. You tell them what role they're going to be performing in your project. So you get Steve, the web developer, and you say, all right, you're going to be the main web developer. That means you, inside of my project, I've defined you as web developer 1. So any activity that I've assigned to web developer 1, that's yours, right? Or you bring in Bob from accounting. You say, all right, Bob, you're the project accountant. So I need you to read through all of our accounting plans, right? All the financial plans that we've done, all of our contracts and stuff. You're the one managing that, so you take a look at that. And on all of my activities and stuff, I've listed you as accountant 1, and so we're going to change that to Bob Smith or whoever you are. Resource calendars are another thing that's going to come out of this. So now that we have Bob, you say, all right, Bob, what's your calendar like? And you'll say, well, I've got a week scheduled for vacation in November. That week of Thanksgiving, we're traveling, and so I'm going to be out. And, my son's recital is the second week of December, and so we've got that too. All right. So now we start to get that. Now, when it was just web developer 1 in my work breakdown structure, well, I didn't know who that web developer was. I didn't know that they might be on vacation or whatever. But now that I actually know who the person is, we can find out. So we've got to go and do project management plan updates. We've got to update information, load these people's names into all of our previous forms where we had just like generic names, and get that straightened out. All right. So that is all a part of acquiring the project team. Now we put them to work, right? Well, we got 2 more processes that lead into that, and if we take a look at it, you'll see develop the project team and manage the project team. This is actually putting them to work. Develop happens first, right? This is actually building team cohesion, getting them together, getting them ready to move forward, and then managing the project team is actually setting them to do it. So we need to take a look at those before our team is officially gelled, right? But we probably don't have enough time this segment to jump into one of those, do we, Ronnie?
I don't think so.
All right, so why don't we do this? Why don't we stop and take a break? And when we get back, we'll continue on with our team building exercise here inside of the PMP training. So stay tuned. We'll be back in a few. All right, welcome back, everybody. So in the last segment, we took a look at acquiring our project team.
Yep.
So now we've got all these employees sitting around. What do we do with them, right? Or virtually sitting around, I guess.
Yeah, time for us to develop them into a team. And so we're going to talk about some of the concepts for us here in terms of actually making them a cohesive unit. I like using that term, cohesive.
Cohesive. It's an adhesive unit.
An adhesive.
All right, so we really don't have much in the way of different inputs here than we did with acquiring the team, right? We've got our human resource management plan because that's where we defined how we're going to handle a lot of this. And then we've got our project staff assignments, right, which is what we created in the acquire project teams, that we know what each person's responsibility is. And then the resource calendars also, so we can find out when somebody's not going to be available. And we take that, and these inputs don't really contribute as much as we normally see into the tools and techniques. Most of the tools and techniques with developing a project team are kind of designed to work by themselves without inputs, right? You're starting from scratch, building up a team together. So what are some of the things? Well, number one is one that in the IT industry we see the least of, which is interpersonal skills.
Wow.
It's terrible in the IT industry. But if you work in another industry, it's probably great.
Yeah.
But interpersonal skills is simply your ability to communicate and relay information to another person without having direct access to their mind, right? So writing a letter, speaking out loud, talking on the telephone, these are ways we communicate. And poor communication is typically one of the keystones of a failed project, right? I mean, that is the way things can really plummet down if you're not careful. So we want to make sure that we have good communications and that it's something we're comfortable with. If it's not something we're comfortable with, we need to hire somebody who does. Many organizations have a PR firm or public relations people that help with that communication. But a good project manager is going to have good interpersonal skills. You might need to take a class.
Yeah. Sometimes because we don't have all the skills necessary, one of the things that they do call out on, especially in the PMBOK, is that idea of the conflict management or the conflict resolution. So again, if you don't have those skills, hiring out is probably the best way to go about it. But do take a look at that idea. So we might be great at everything else in terms of communicating, especially our anger and our feelings, but the idea of actually making sure that we resolve all this is pretty much a key.
So much pent-up hostility.
I know.
All right, now after that, we've got training, and I mentioned this one in the last segment, is that when you bring on team members, they might not be trained, all right? And when I talk about training, I really mean two different types of training, right? One, they might not be trained for the job they've just been assigned, in which case, we may need to get them training for that. You might have brought somebody on to do your bookkeeping, your accounting, but maybe they just have a background in computers, and so you might need to send them through an accounting course or something to get them trained up. Hopefully not, but it does happen. The other thing they might not be trained for is working in a project. Right? If this is the first time they've worked in a project that is a project done according to the PMI framework, then they may not know about things like the importance of change tickets or how to fill out a change ticket. They might not know about progress reports and how to report that, all the various plans and what the plans mean. So we might need to create an abbreviated PMP course just for these people. And there's a lot of people that do that. They have project management fundamentals is what they normally call it. And you have a one-day workshop where you bring your team together and you walk them through what's expected to them or expected of them in your project, right? So they understand the importance of paperwork. That's the hard one to really beat into somebody's head. Is like, oh, it's common sense. I don't need to write this down. Yes, you do. We need that for historical purposes. So communicating that properly to them, getting them trained up and ready to operate in a projectized environment. The next one is team building, and team building is one that requires a bit of work. All right, if you are fortunate enough to have been working with the same group of employees for years and years, you guys may already be a cohesive unit that's ready to operate and do everything that you need at the highest peak of performance. But that's never happened for me. I read about it somewhere. For most of us, though, you're going to have at least one new team member, and anytime you introduce even a single new team member, it throws off the balance. It throws off the balance of the project and the project team. So you've got to get them back to operating like a smooth unit, right? And there are a number of team building exercises that are out there for that. And if we could talk about things like rock climbing or whatever, there's things you can do to get people to form a team and form relationships. You can let it happen on its own course, right? But you run risks when you do that. Sometimes people will choose to isolate themselves. Other times people start to form cliques, right? So you get these divisions inside of your project team, and that's always a bad thing. So more often than not, as a project manager, you need to get involved. All right. And when we get involved, it's a good idea to recognize the various phases that a team goes through. And PMI specifically calls this out in the PMBOK. They have what's called the Tuckman ladder, which defines like 5 different phases that a project goes through, and they're fairly easy to remember. Let me bring these up in the notes.
Yeah, the overall development of a team here, again, everybody goes through psychologically something, and here we're actually starting to take a look at that. It's important that you do understand these, because I think even Don was talking about it, that you will see this on the exam, so let's make sure we go ahead and cover this.
All right, so there's 5 phases, and they all kind of sound the same, which makes them easy to remember. There's forming, storming, norming, performing, and adjourning, which doesn't sound right. I mean, you could say adjourning, and it makes it a little easier to remember, but then you sound Nordic. So, but adjourning is the last one.
Yeah.
Each one kind of represents the state that a team is in, and teams always start in the forming stage. All right. And then they progress through these other stages, but things can happen and make them go backwards. So let's walk through what each stage is, and then we'll kind of give an example. So forming is the very first stage, right? This is where you get your team together in the very beginning, and they're meeting each other for the first time, all right? So these are people that may not have ever worked together a single moment. They may not have even bumped into each other in the hallway before. Now they're meeting each other, and they're starting to kind of understand what the project is.
Yeah.
Now, a team in the forming phase is not ready to do work, right? Oftentimes when you're in the forming phase, they don't know whose responsibility what is. They may not even know what the project is just yet. So you want to get through the forming phase as quickly as possible. Basically, as the project manager, you are informing them what the project is, what their job role is, those things to get them through the forming phase.
Yeah, and this is very important in a team building, because what we need to do is we want to make sure that everybody in the team understands what my role is in the team, or what Don's role is going to be in the team. And so the forming stage is very important that we go ahead and establish, like, here's what he's going to be responsible for, and here's where we're going to go if we have problems and issues with that. Because without that, right, a lot of times people do come up with questions, and they go, I don't remember who to go and ask. So this is a very important part of it.
Yep. The second phase is storming, right? When you get different people together, there's different personality types. And there's, I can't even count the amount of different ways to measure, like what are some of the personality quiz things?
Good gosh, there's so many. There's Taylor Johnson, there's DISC, there's so many.
DISC, that's a good one. So, you hear people, let's go really simple, right? You hear people talk about like type A personalities, right? You have some people who are alphas, who are aggressive, who are leaders. And then you have other people who aren't, who are followers, right? Not that they're weak-minded or anything like that. They just don't want to step up and take the leadership. They're better at doing something. They're doers, right? So different people have different personalities. And when a team first forms, we don't know everybody's personality yet. So when we're ready to start work, we almost always go right into storming. Unless the team has already been well established in the past, you might skip past this phase. But normally we go right into storming. And here's where people start to butt heads, right? Here's where people start doing work, and they're learning about each other and how they do work, and finding out who is the alpha personality, who is going to step up and be that leader, and kind of how things are going to roll. This can be good and bad. Left uncontrolled, you can end up in situations where somebody who is not a project manager becomes the de facto ruler of your project, and that can be pretty bad, right? As the project manager, you are the leader, right? Doesn't matter if you have 5 type A personalities on your team, you're the leader, so you've got to rein them in, and you have to recognize that. So you're part of the storming process also, right?
Yeah, without actually being able to evaluate this and see it happen and know where you have to go to control, it becomes incredibly counterproductive in anything that you try and do as a team from that point on, because now you have that de facto leader, and you have you as actually being the appointed leader. They're not exactly sure who to listen to. So really getting this out in the open right at the beginning, part of a great process to building a team.
Yep. Once that's done, we shift into norming. The norming phase is where, all right, people have learned how they work, how they interact, and they start doing work. Okay, so they actually start being productive at this point. They may have been somewhat productive in the storming phase, but probably not. Now they're ready to get things done. People have established their role, their dominance or submissiveness or whatever inside of the project, and they're ready to rock. Okay, so norming is a pretty decent place to be, but it just means people are getting things done. It doesn't necessarily mean they're happy about it or they're unhappy. They're just getting things done. If it's a good team, though, if everybody's able to communicate and things are going well and people like each other, then all of a sudden we start switching into what's called performing. Performing means not only are we a team that works together, but we work together highly efficiently. The people know each other's pros and cons. They kind of anticipate each other's needs. So now we're able to work better than a normal team. We can get even beyond that because of the closeness, the relationship between the team members.
Right.
That's where you want to be. When you're dealing with team building, performing is what you're trying to achieve. So even if your team is normalized, right? They're working, they're doing okay, that doesn't mean stop. You got to go even better. Get these people working really close together, communicating and exchanging information, and you'll get performing. That's when you get the best effort out of all of your employees.
Right.
Now, any little thing can happen to disrupt this, right? Maybe somebody's out on sick leave, and so you have to bring in a replacement. Well, the instant you bring in that replacement, what happens? You drop all the way back to storming, right? Here comes this new personality in who might be an alpha, who has their own predisposition, and now you've got to kind of set that straight, kind of line the expectations back up and get things moving along. Or it might be a person that snaps right into the old person's place and you don't get any disruption whatsoever. But it's not uncommon to drop all the way back to storming, and then you have to do norming and then performing, kind of go through each of those again. So just because you got to performing once doesn't mean you stay there, right? May not even be something like adding a new employee. It could be an existing team. I can think of a great example. I was working on one project where things were going great. We were definitely in that performing area. All the team members were working together. Things were going really well. And then we came to this spot where we had to decide on a particular piece of hardware. We had 2 vendors to pick from. And half the team preferred one vendor, and the other half of the team preferred the other vendor. So there became this divide in the project based on this certain decision that had to be made. Now, we went through our decision-making process. We did we did graded matrix cards and stuff, and then we selected one of the vendors, all right? Well, from that point on, the people that liked the other vendor, it was like a divide. It really did. It created a separation, and those employees were not performing anymore. And since they weren't performing, the other people couldn't perform, so the whole team dropped down to norming. We were still working, we were still getting things done, but that divide was there. It was present. And basically, I had to step in and straighten that out, get it where they understood, like, hey, at the end of the day, your job isn't to, interact with this vendor or that vendor. It's to move this project forward. So we may deal with different vendors. That's how it goes. We had a scoring system that we all agreed upon in the planning phase, and we followed it, right? So you have to get people back in line, and we'll talk about that later when we talk about issue management and conflict resolution, right? Which we get in monitoring and controlling. So we'll get a chance to see those later. But that's what we need to keep our eye out for as a project manager, to make sure that we always see ourselves in our performing phase. All right. Now, when the project is done, when things start winding down, we start getting our deliverables and so on, that's when we get into adjourning. Okay, adjourning is where our team completes the work and starts to break apart, right? We send our people back out to, return them to the PMO or wherever so they can go and get assigned to the next project. Now, the reason adjourning is called out here as a special phase is, as a PM, there's some work we need to do, all right? And we'll see this in the closing process group when we get to that, the closing phase, because what we want to do is we want to create like a scorecard or a report card for each person that was a member of that team. And in there, we want to record things like how well they participated in the team, how well they got along with person A or person B or person C, so that in the future, when we build our next team, we can make sure to get the best team members possible. Maybe I've got a team of 10 people, and there was one in particular who was dragging the whole team down. Well, you can whip them into shape, get them in line, and turn them into a great employee, but sometimes that just doesn't work out. And so at the end of the day, you can mark that employee and say, you know what? I want to make sure I don't have that guy on my next team. The next time I form a team, we'll be better off without that person. So that's information we need to know, and that's why we have a designated adjourning phase, so that we can recognize that stuff and kind of document it. All right, so those are all part of team building activities. There are a few other things, and be careful with these. Team building activities can go horribly wrong. One of my favorites, I went to work for a company, and they wanted to have a team building exercise. So they decided that the best thing to do would be to take the whole team and go-kart racing.
Oh, yeah.
And Ronnie, you've known me long enough. I hate go-kart racing. and so we go go-kart racing. And I was thinking about it as I'm in this stupid little car driving around a track, and I'm thinking, boy, what better way to do team building than to isolate each team member in a separate car so they can't talk to each other and then pit them against each other, right? That's just the ultimate in team building. And it was just it was a great example of a very, very poor exercise. You know, you want to create exercises that get people talking, get people working together. Something as simple as just going to lunch as a team, you know, that kind of stuff to create that non-workplace chatter, just to get people to understand each other's personalities. Yeah, some people have a hard time coming out of their shells, and in the workplace that may not happen. So, you know, you've got to find out what works for you. All right, now we got a laundry list of other tools here, right? Like ground rules, right? Ground rules are an important one for me, especially in meetings, right? You can have ground rules for everything, but meetings are one of the best places. I've noticed over the years that if you're going to manage personality types, like type A's, right? What's a type A going to do in a meeting? They're going to have an idea. So if I say, all right, does anybody have any idea of how we can get this done on schedule? A type A is going to have an idea, right? But what about somebody who's not a type A? Somebody who's a type B or whatever is not a type A. Well, they might have a great idea, but not want to say it. They might say, man, you know, I could recommend it, but that type A person, that they're just going to steamroll me. You know, they're going to bulldoze my idea and just browbeat me, and then their idea is going to win out. So I'll just keep it quiet, right? But we want to make sure that everybody participates equally. So how do we do that, right? Well, we can establish ground rules. We can set up rules for the meeting, and these can be very simple rules. They can be very complex rules. They can be silly rules, like talking stick.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen that one?
Yeah.
You can only talk if you've got the talking stick, and you pass that around, and that helps to eliminate that whole idea of somebody steamrolling other people. You might have other rules that say, like, hey, when we have a decision in a meeting, we always use the Delphi technique, right? The anonymous voting system or something like that to make sure that we've got that. Other ground rules might be to just say things like, we don't allow people to raise their voices in the meetings. Meetings are always held to 30 minutes or you're not allowed to go over. You're not allowed to eat during the meetings. You know, they can be very simple, mundane things, but help the meetings stay cohesive. Yeah. All right, co-location. I kind of talked about this earlier with virtual teams. With virtual teams, you might have employees all over the country, all over the world, and you lose that cohesive unit. You lose the banter, the daily chit-chat that happens that helps to build a strong team. So many organizations choose to do co-location. Now, this applies even if all the employees work in the same city. So, for example, I used to work in a skyscraper, and our offices were spread across 5 floors. So we had like the 17th through 21st floors is what we had. And that meant employees could be on any of those floors. There were many employees that I never saw in a day. You know, I would go straight to the 19th floor where my office was. I'd go in there. I'd see my department, right? The IT guys. That's what I would see. But I wouldn't see anybody in underwriting or accounting or these other departments because they were on different floors. So when you have a project, a cool technique to use to build cohesiveness between your project management team is co-location. Have them move their desks, move their offices all to the same area. So now it's not just me in the IT department, it's me surrounded by my project team, which might have an accountant and so on, all a part of that are non-IT people. The nice thing about co-location is if I'm on the phone call with somebody and I'm talking to them about information, and I'm like, hey, why are you over budget? Meanwhile, my accountant is sitting over beside me, and they overhear the phone call and say, oh, wait, I've got some information on that, right? Now we get better communication. They had information I didn't, but they were right there, so it was able to happen, and that solved the problem. It's not always realistic, though. You know, in a cube office, like what we do here, I could move cubes. It would take me like 10 minutes, right? Not a big deal. There's nothing in my cube I really care about. Well, I guess it kind of ticked me off if somebody took my computer, but for the most part, there's not anything in there that I care about. But if you have an actual office, right? You know, actually moving your entire office contents or something is not necessarily realistic. So it's not an option for every company, but it is an option for some. All right, recognition and rewards. With each of your team members, they provide a role. They provide a service to your project. And as your project moves along, some people might do exemplary performance, and we want to make sure we reward that. But rewarding them actually serves 2 purposes. You know, one, it cements that person's position in the project. They understand they're doing a great job. You bolster their confidence and morale, and it keeps them working, right? And it keeps them working well. But it also encourages those who didn't get the award to say, man, if I do a better job, this is the recognition I'll get. I really like that, you know? And so it is a good idea to draw that out. We also mentioned recognition and rewards at the close of a project, you know, to reward the team there too. But these are part of the team process. When somebody does an exceptional job, you should recognize that. Make sure the rest of the team is aware. And then personnel assessment tools. This is what I mentioned earlier as far as like a scorecard or a grade report, whatever you want to call it, where we need to assess our team members. And you may create ahead of time a little score sheet that says, gets along well with others, attendance, things like that, all the things we had in elementary school. And use that to gauge your employees. If you have a team member who is falling behind, who is not communicating with the team, you've got two choices, right? Choice number one is to can them, dump them out of the project, get a replacement employee, right? You can do that, certainly. But the better option is option two, which is to correct that, right? Train them to be better. Make sure they recognize their faults. A lot of times they just don't even know it, right? So you make sure they recognize it, you inform them, you let them know, then give them a chance to become a better employee, right? Because when they're a better employee, not only does it help your project, but it helps the next project that's going to get that same employee too, right? Better to craft somebody who's a successful employee than to just keep starting from scratch until you hope to hit somebody who meets your needs by luck, right? That's not really effective.
Yeah, and you read about this a lot of times in the idea of the management books that you actually see out there, where it talks about the idea of finding the right person and then training them up instead of trying to look for every skill that you need and then hoping that they're the right person. And this is a part of the idea of the assessment. Most people don't know if they're actually doing a great job or if they're doing an okay or mediocre or not even a great job at all. By helping them out to be able to see that, it really does actually help them in terms of just what they're doing every day, and really just helps you because they're going to become a more productive team member. So do remember that.
And there's this saying out on the internet right now. Various IT companies, very very edgy Silicon Valley. They say hire slow, fire fast.
Yeah.
All right. So what they're saying is hire slow, take time to find the right employee, and if they're not the right fit, fire them fast and move on. Right. Now there's something to be said about that approach, but the fire fast thing means instead of trying to correct the problem, just give up on them and move on. And that's not really right for most environments. So be wary of that. We hear about it because of companies like Facebook and Amazon, and Zappos and stuff, where they are massive, multi-billion-dollar companies. So when they fire somebody, a replacement, well, they've probably got a stack of resumes 10,000 high for that replacement. But if you're a small or medium organization, somewhere like here in Gainesville, if I got tired of Ronnie and fired him, it's not like I've got a stack of show host resumes sitting over on my desk that I could go and pick through.
Wait, you have a whole chat room full probably now.
That's right. Everybody's like, well, I need to email Don. So it can be hard to line up that next person. And having a poor employee that can be trained up better is more valuable than having no employee, right? So you want to make sure you take the approach that's right for your situation, and don't let Silicon Valley serve as your model.
Yeah, not always.
It's like have you ever read the Steam, no, not Steam, Valve. Valve is a video game company, and they released their employee handbook out to the internet, and people were going crazy over it because they had this interesting project selection process. So when they pick a new project, what do? They don't. They let their employees do it, and they leave their employees unassigned to teams, and if the employees want, they meet each other in the hallway and they say, hey, how do you feel about working on this game? And they form a team right there, and they start to work on projects that weren't selected by the company. And some people see that and they're like, man, that sounds great. And I'll tell you, it does not work in most environments. Right? Maybe the video game industry is different because they're very successful. But if you were to do like building houses and you just left it up to your contractors to come together and say, what do you think about building a 5-story Tudor-style house or whatever? They could come up with all sorts of crazy things. So finding the right team methodology for your environment, obviously very important.
Yep.
All right, now our outputs on this are really, really straightforward, right? We've got our team performance assessments, right? We're talking about the entire team, not just a single person here, the entire team. We need to evaluate it and come up with a summary. Are we storming, norming, performing? Where are we in that model, right? Then our enterprise environmental factor updates, right? Enterprise environmental factors, remember that's how we do the things that we do, right? How our company operates. And as our team builds and we come up with new ideas, new team building structures, we may want to update our enterprise environmental factors to reflect that so that other project managers can take advantage of it too. We might say, boy, that go-kart thing was a really bad idea. And so we can put that into our EEFs and basically state like, don't do this, that really didn't work out. So my second favorite, so the go-kart racing was a bad one. Crew. Are you familiar with Crew,
No,
the
no.
boating?
Yeah,
So,
I know what
it's
you're
like
talking
Ivy League schools do it.
Right.
They have the really long,
Yeah.
thin boat, and you have 10 people on
Yeah.
there, and one person
Row.
who's the coxswain, right? And they're yelling out, stroke, or whatever, and everybody rows. So, sounds like a great team building exercise. If everybody's not moving their oars at the same time, you don't go anywhere. But
You can't breathe.
well, the problem is, you might have some team members that are out of shape, or you might have team members like this guy right here who don't know how to swim. And I'll be damned if I'm going on some kind of boat. And so now again, it is tough to find that right exercise for your team. Yeah, that was my fault. I can't be a team member. I can't even swim. All right, so maybe that strengthens your relationship, right? Like I'm counting on one of them to save me from drowning.
Yeah, if they can breathe. As long as they can breathe.
All right, well, and I don't like getting up that early in the morning. The Crew, they always do it at like 5 a.m.
Yeah.
It's crazy. All right, well, that's pretty much it for Develop the Project Team. We have a little bit more team building to go on before we wrap this episode up. So let's stop here and take a break. And when we get back, we've got managing the project team to jump into.
Yeah.
So stay tuned. We'll be back in a minute. All right, welcome back, everybody. So now we're going to dive into managing the project team. So we've formed our team, we got our people together. Now it's time to start work,
Working.
right? We are in the execution phase, and people should be executing. Now, your team members each have different responsibilities that they're performing, and we need to keep an eye on that. Now, how do we keep an eye on it? If it's a small team, we might just be managing that ourselves, right? And you'll see that's the first tool and technique right here, observation and conservation. We, as the project manager, just keep an eye on our team. If everybody's co-located, if they're all in one area, if you can walk around and see them, that's easy to do, all right? But if you're a virtual team, if your team is spread out, if it's a massive team that one person can't possibly manage, then you're going to be relying on other things. And that's where our inputs come in over here, right? Look at all the inputs that we've got. The human resource management plan, that goes without saying, right? This is how we're going to manage our people. The project staff assignments, so we know who is doing what, who's got what responsibilities. But then we start to see the actual information that we're going to work with. Team performance assessments, issue logs, and work performance reports.
Right.
Let's talk about each one of these. Team performance assessments. I mentioned in the last segment, when you've got a team and you've done your storming, forming, norming, performing, when you've done all of that, you need to stay performing. And so you need to be assessing your team to make sure they stay there. And so we may have an assessment report. I've got an example template. Let's see, where is it? I've got all sorts of junk.
The second one, isn't it?
Is it the second one? Team performance assessment. There we go. This is an example of a performance assessment, and you'll see there's not really much to it. Notice how it's breaking it down: scope, quality, schedule. Okay, and cost. So we're kind of broken up scope and quality. I normally combine those. So scope and quality. How well is the team working together to create and achieve the scope of our project and the quality that we've set aside, right? Do they exceed expectations? Do they meet expectations? Or do they need improvements, right? Meets expectations, that means we're norming, right? Things are running fine, but boy, we're not performing. Exceeds expectations means we're performing. But when we're in these storming or norming phases, those, or storming or forming phases, that's where we're in the needs improvement. And we can identify that and kind of recognize how we're proceeding on that. So this is just an example of a team performance report. And it goes on to break it down further, individual areas that need improvement: communication, collaboration, conflict management, right? Each of these different things we kind of fill out. Now, how often do you need to do this type of assessment?
Yeah.
Depends on your project, right? If your project is a 5-year project, we were just talking about Star Trek, right? A 5-year.
Right.
Well, anyhow, so if you've got a 5-year project, you might be doing these assessments every 3 months, right? Or every 6 months. But if you've got a 3-month project, you're probably doing these assessments every week, right? Trying to keep track of things in a manner that leaves you enough time to actually correct for them,
Right.
Now that's a team performance assessment. I've also got team member performance assessments, right? Which are really just the same thing: scope, quality, schedule, cost, and then the individual elements inside of there on the single person, right? So if we find that we're needing to evaluate individual people, it's really just the same basic form. All right. So those are some things we can use as we start to break down the team. There are other forms and paperwork we might deal with. We might have team operating agreements. All right. Here's where we set forth our values and principles, our meeting guidelines, right? The ground rules I mentioned earlier. If we've defined these things out, we use these as part of our assessments. How well are people adhering to all the different things that that we specified right in here? What are our guidelines, decision-making processes, and so on? All right. So those are some of the documents. There are others. Let's see, what else do we call out here? An issue log and a work performance report. The issue log is pretty important. When there's an issue, a conflict, an argument, a problem, right, we need to address it. One employee comes to you and says, look, I'm working really hard here. This other guy, he's not. He's not pulling his weight, and I'm having to double up my effort. It's going to hurt the project. It's definitely going to hurt my morale. Well, as a project manager, you need to step in and do something about it, all right? Whether it's a real problem or not, because sometimes people bring you silly things, right? Like, I really like the Seattle Seahawks, but that guy's a San Diego Chargers fan, and I just can't work with him. Well, we don't care about that. But it's an issue, right?
Yep.
We need to record it in the issue log so we can refer to it later. It especially helps if you've got a problem employee and you can see multiple issues have arisen around that same person. And you can say, look, you're not meshing well with the team. Look at all these issues that we've had over the last 6 months, all these problems that have popped up. Right? The other thing is that when your project is done, your project may be successful. Come in at budget, on schedule, right? Everything meets needs, meets the scope and quality, so things come in great. But you might have had a problem employee that whole time along that project. Well, when the next project comes around and they're acquiring their team, how do they know if that team member is good or not? They look at their project history and they say, wow, this guy was on Don's last project and Don's project was a success. This guy must be pretty good, right? But if we have our issue log, they can say, whoa, it's amazing. Don's project came in successful even with this guy causing problems the whole time. An issue log is what does that. And if you look at it, there's not too much. The way this is laid out, it's actually, it should just kind of continue on sideways, but it's wider than the paper. So with each issue, you assign it an ID. It's normally just going to be like issue 1, issue 2, issue 3. You give it a category if you've got categories for issues, and then what the issue is, okay? So I might have an issue with an employee, and maybe it's something serious, right? Maybe it's like a harassment issue, a harassment claim, which I'm spelling wrong. There we go. A harassment claim, and I might specify the impact on objectives, right? If I have 2 employees who can't work together, I have to separate them out, can't have them in the same room. That's going to reduce their productivity, and it's going to extend my project schedule due to the special needs. Urgency on a harassment issue should be high. The responsible party, who it is that's handling that, so that's usually going to be the project manager, or you might have to get your human resources involved in it, all right? Action, separate employees, or, it might be terminate employee. Your status, this might be ongoing, and a due date that you need to take action if you've got one. If it's ongoing, I might not have one. And then in the comments, I detail what that issue is. And so as we go, we're tracking this, tracking what the issue is. And it might be issues with people. It might be issues with just the project as a whole. Hey, there was a risk, right? That the price of wood might go up, and as a result, in my house building project, my expenses are now high. I would record that as an issue, right? So an issue log is a living document. It doesn't really affect your project, right? The issues affect your project, but the log itself is more to benefit projects of the future, right? And to allow you to see trends if you've got a problem area that's constantly creeping up. If you have more than one project manager, if you have sub-project managers and things like that, an issue log is essential. It's the only way you can track this kind of activity across your project. All right, other things that we might have, things like a team directory, just to be able to identify who your team members are, their phone numbers, and so on. Team member status reports, right? As you do individual evaluations of your team members, you can go in and break it down like this, indicating, what their activities are that are assigned to them, what their activities that they've accomplished, right? Activities planned but not accomplished this reporting period, what's outstanding, just kind of keeping track of that. And any root causes for variance. Anytime they didn't meet the requirements that you set forth, why? All right. So you can kind of lay all that information out there, tracking exactly how that employee is operating in your environment. And the last one I have is this team member performance report. You'll notice overlap between these documents. You're not going to use them all, right? You're going to pick which one is right for your environment. This one just has a simple audit, a progress report, right? How well are they doing in a particular area audited? That's why this is real general, area audited. We have to tell them what it is that we're monitoring. And then areas where they excelled, areas where they could improve. If there's areas where they can improve, any deficiencies or defects, and then our comments, right? So this type of paperwork is how we're going to track this progress. And on a large project team where you might have hundreds of people or thousands of people, you can't do it all by yourself. So you're going to have other people that are completing this data and turning it into you, which is why in this project, or in this process group right here, we'll see those are inputs. The issue log, the work performance reports, the team performance assessment, all of that is an input into manage the project team. All right, so we take all that data and we use that for our project performance appraisal. All right, so now we've seen several, right? We saw team member performance appraisal. We've seen team performance appraisal, and now project performance. How is our project performing? Is it running like a well-oiled machine, nice and smooth, things are going great? Or am I hitting a lot of bumps? Am I hitting a lot of issues now that are burning up time and resources that may make it more difficult for me to be successful down the road? All right. So that is important. We want to make sure that we pay attention to that we keep on top of it. Conflict management is going to be a big piece of that. When we have conflict, and conflict, it's such an aggressive word, right? I don't mean like one employee punches another in the face. I just mean you've got a decision to make. Anytime you have a decision, there's a conflict, right? If you have two possible outcomes and people are choosing different ones, you've got conflict, right? It may be a very amicable, friendly, peaceful conflict, but it's still a conflict nonetheless. As a project manager, we need to resolve it. We come up with a solution that works for everyone, and we move forward. I shouldn't say it that way. That's a trap, right? There's never a solution that works for everyone, right? So we need to choose the solution that's best for our project, right? Which one ensures the highest degree of success and gets us moving forward? Sometimes that might not be the best decision for everyone. In fact, it might not even be the best decision for a majority. You might have to step in and override, right? And I know we talked about that earlier, that projects can be run as a democracy or as a dictatorship or whatever, and oftentimes you have to make that decision, all right? But if a conflict arises, PMI has a specific set of ways that they can be handled. Let me bring up Ronnie's notes. Here we go. The 5 techniques for resolving a conflict, all right? If we've got a conflict, we can choose from any of these 5. All right, most of them are wrong, and you don't want to do them, right? So they're really here as an example of what not to do. But there's at least one that's the good way to do it and what we need to know for the exam. So you want to be familiar with these, but let's run through all of them. All right. The first one is withdraw, avoid, right? Withdraw or avoid. You may have a issue that's going on with the project, and you come up with an idea to fix it. So here's your idea. Someone else has an idea on how to fix it. So now you've got 2 different ways on how to fix your project and get it back on track. And you got to pick. Well, there's a conflict between the 2 different solutions, and one person, after arguing long enough or whatever, finally just says, you know what, forget it. I don't care. We'll go with your way. Whatever. Right? They withdraw their recommendation. They avoid the argument by just saying, forget it, I'm done, we'll go your way, whatever. Well, is that the problem solved? Problem solved, move on? Well, the problem is solved in a way, right? But now you've got an employee who's no longer going to be in that performing phase. They're no longer going to be in tight mesh lockstep with the rest of the team. They're going to feel like they had a perfectly good solution and we didn't go that way. And we may find later on that their solution was better. And then you get the I told you so syndrome, right? Which is it's really hard for people to overcome. So when you see this, it's important that you recognize it because it's not you. The project manager is not the one that initiates this. It's usually the person who's involved in the argument, right? When you see somebody do withdrawing, recognize that. Recognize that that's a problem. Don't say, oh, thank goodness, now that problem's solved, I don't have to worry about it, let's move on, right? Because it's easy to do that. As a PM, you can do that, but your team is wounded, right? And you need to get it healthy again. So you need to recognize that wound happened and stop it and say, wait a minute, don't take your idea back. It's a good idea. Maybe you have an alpha personality who's steamrolling the other person. The other person just says, forget it. Step in and champion that person. Say, no, wait, that's a great idea. Let's look at these on the merits, right? Let's do the scorecard. Let's do an anonymous decision cycle like a Delphi. Let's do something to make sure that that's on the table and then we make a decision. And we may ultimately not choose their way, but at least now we know why, right? We have it documented. They can say, all right, I had my idea. It was a good idea, but we went with the other guy's idea because it was better, right? And they understand that. But if you just let them withdraw, they don't know that. And in their mind, they had the right idea, and in their mind, they were wronged by the project by not moving forward with it. All All right. The other one is smooth
Yeah.
/ accommodate. All right, with this one, you have the conflict, right? And you need to pick a solution. And so what you do is you pick a solution. And then for the people who didn't succeed, you start to highlight the parts of the solution that were in common, right? Just the good parts. You highlight the good and kind of push the bad under the rug and say, look, I know it's not your solution, but this one's pretty similar. And yeah, it's got a lot of stuff in common with what you had. And so it's going to work out well. Let's go this way, all right? What you're doing when you do smoothing and accommodating is you're not actually resolving the problem. You're just trying to hide it. And that's a really big problem, because when you hide the problem, it's still there.
Yeah.
And sure, it might go away for a month or two, but then it's going to pop back up later on. And you're going to say, man, we went with that EMC sand. I really thought we should go with the HP sand. And I know they had some common features and stuff, but man, this project stinks now. I hate it. If we'd only gone HP, right? Even though we made that decision 2 months ago, that kind of thing starts to creep up and cause problems. So that's smooth and accommodate. That's also another one that you don't want to do.
Yeah, a lot of times the smoothing and accommodating for us really does come down to not the very fact that they're ready to champion their particular position, but because they feel like that it would be better harmony for the team, and in that they compromise the overall project deliverable that we might have instead. And so that's why, even though you go, oh no, that's exactly what I would rather do, and you may want that because it does provide harmony, but it really doesn't provide the overall project deliverable. So let's make sure we understand that too.
Yeah. The next one is compromise / reconcile. Now this is one you hear a lot, all right? This is where there's a conflict. You have two parties that are in disagreement, and you mediate, you step in, and you get them both to compromise, right? To come up with a single solution that they're both happy with, right? And it's not even about happiness. You get a single solution that they both can agree upon, right?
Yeah.
Now, on a positive side, you look at this as like, hey, boy, I'm a great conflict resolution person. I got these both to agree on like terms, right? Here's the problem with compromise. In a normal argument, there's a winner and a loser. And the winner is happy, they got what they want. And the loser is unhappy, they didn't get what they want. In a compromise, there is no winner, right? No one team got what they wanted. So in a compromise, everyone's a loser. Now the project as a whole may be a winner because now you're moving forward, right? But the team members themselves will not feel like they won. They'll feel like we created a patchwork, a hodgepodge of these two different solutions, taking what worked and not really getting what was best about the two solutions. It's hard to do a compromise where you end up with people feeling like it was the best decision, right? Compromises, while they appear attractive to us as an easy way to solve a problem, really just kind of creates that hidden animosity. So a compromise, while you hear a lot of people say it's perfectly fine, is not a solution you want.
Yeah. The problem also with the compromise is that once you make it with one decision, right, for your project, the next one becomes easier, okay? And then the following becomes even easier. And all of a sudden, once again, now our overall quality of our deliverable is not where we want it, or our project is not exactly where we need it to be, because we've now conceded so often and we've compromised so often, we go, we're really not even satisfied with pushing forward with the project.
Yeah, it's got a lot of downstream problems. The next one is force / direct, all right? This is where there's a conflict, you have two parties in disagreement, and you step in as the project manager and you say, all right, here's how it is, right? No more talking, no more arguments, this is it. This is the decision we're making, we're moving forward, all right? On a positive side, solves the problem, doesn't it, right? And gets the project moving the shortest amount of time. On a negative side, the winners, the people whose side you pick, they're fine, but the other team is gonna feel slighted. You didn't even bother to listen to their argument. You just cast it down and moved on forward, right? So while it might be what's best for the project, it is gonna seed some disharmony amongst the team. So there we have a problem also, right? That we basically are slighting at least part of our team.
Yeah, and I hate to bring this up again, but again, down the line, right? Once you use that human resource capital, that idea of the good interpersonal capital that you made with the team, and now you do this. You've used up all that, and then next time when it comes along and you do that, it becomes much more difficult to enforce what you feel like needs to be enforced, because then people really have that kind of built up wall now that think that you're going to actually treat them fairly.
Yeah. So far we've gone through 4 solutions, and they've all been pretty bad, right? And you guys, you're probably thinking about past experiences right now and how you've used some of these 4. Well, it's the fifth one.
Yep.
That's the one we want to use, which is collaborate/problem solve. That means collaborate, talk, exchange information, learn about both sides, and then problem solve. Figure out which one is the best. And don't just like think about it and say, oh yeah, I like that one, it sounds better. Quantify it, put it together, create scorecards, right? Take a vote, do the Delphi technique, do whatever. You know, we talked about all those earlier in the show. Figure out which method is the best with a quantifiable means, right? So that when you pick the winning team, you know it's the right one because it got the best scores. With the information you had, it was the best decision. And for the team that lost, the people who were backing the wrong idea, they know why. They can look at the scorecard and they can say, well, all right, I can see why they chose to go that way because of these various things. We understand that. We like this other idea, but we understand why we're going this way. That moment of creating understanding, that moment of closure for people, that's important because now they don't feel like we went with the wrong idea because we didn't have enough information. We took the time to make the right call. And you should be doing that anyway. Anytime you use your decision-making techniques, this should be happening, right? So you take a deep breath, you gather the information from the people, you hear both sides, you create your scorecards, you quantify it, and you come up with a solution. People don't have to agree with it, but they can understand why you made it, and you can get the project moving forward. So that's the way that we want to go. All right. Now, there is one that they don't really mention in here, which is the postpone, where you just delay. When there is a problem, as a project manager, you really need to be very confrontive, all right? When there's a problem that needs a decision, you need to step in and do it. The longer you delay, the worse it's going to get, the harder it's going to be to resolve. So if you're one of those that says, I'm just going to let it kind of work itself out, well, that's bad because when it works itself out, it'll work out using one of those 4 other methods, and that's not what you want. So you need to get in there and confront the issue. The sooner, the better. If you recognize somebody's performance is dropping, don't just wait and see if they pick back up. They might, right? But in the meantime, you're wasting valuable time while they're underperforming. Step in, recognize it right away. Find out what the problem is. It could be something very serious. Maybe they had a relative pass away, right? And so they're obviously not going to be very happy about that, and it's going to affect their workplace performance. So if you know that, you can say, you know what? Why don't you take a week off? Take a week off, we'll bring somebody else in, and then you can come back, take some time to collect yourself. That way you can bring somebody else in and cover them for that week. If you just wait for them to pick back up a week later, they'll pick back up. But you just got a week of poor performance. Your project has been affected. You want to take care of your people, but you've got to take care of your project too. So you've got to find that healthy solution. All right. The other thing is just interpersonal skills, right? That's the other tool and technique we have here. And it really influences everything that we've talked about so far. You've got to be able to communicate to people, exchange information to find out, about the issues, about the problems, how we make those decisions, how we get moving forward. The end result of this is usually going to be a change request, right? We had to make a decision. If we're making a decision during the execution phase, then it's something we didn't plan for. All of our decisions should already be made. So if you're making a decision at this point, whatever you choose is going to result in a change request, all right? Hopefully it gets approved, otherwise you're in bigger trouble. But it gets approved and that becomes part of the project. Some of the other things, project management plan updates, right? As we update with the information that we've gathered. Project document updates, specifically the issue log, right? Any decision needs to get logged in the issue log. Enterprise environmental factors and organizational process updates. Those are all things that we may need to do, as a result of the output of this one. All right. But when we follow that procedure, we should have a team that is performing, operating at their optimal, even when a disagreement occurs because we resolve it quickly, we continue to move forward, and the team understands what's going on. That's really what's important here.
Yeah. This is where your leadership skills and your influence are really going to shine in the overall project when you start doing this, right? Your team will now start taking on some of the characteristics that you really do approve of and that you can actually use to influence and to benefit the entire project here. So doing the management part of this project or the team building is really kind of where you have your biggest thumbprint that you will have in terms of getting done what you want done. And so do take the time to make sure you take a look at this part of the process.
All right, well, Ronnie, as far as the executing phase goes, that pretty much wraps up the human resource management knowledge area. We still have some more to talk about with executing. We still have managed communications, conduct procurements, managed stakeholder engagement. So we still have a few more on executing. Not too much more, though, and you'll see a lot of what we've talked about here in executing is pretty common sense, right? It's controlling where we'll get the real work. So this is a pretty good spot for us to stop and wrap up the show. You got anything else to throw in, Ronnie?
Nope.
All right.
I do not.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, let me just remind you that if you ever have any questions on this, be sure to use, us.
Right.
Ask us. That's what we're here for. Live during the show, you can go to itpro.tv/live, and you'll see the chat box right beneath the video. You can post your questions there. We monitor and answer during the show. If you have questions after the show, use our Q&A forums. There's a link at the top of the page that says Q&A. You can click on it, post your question there. Again, we monitor and answer. So take advantage of that resource. It is there for you. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed the show. Signing off for IT Pro TV, I'm Don Pizzette.
And I'm Ronnie Wong.
And we will see you next time.